Welcome, everybody. My name is Ajay Gupta. I'm with Gupta, Evans and Associates. We've got a great panel here today. There's a lot of interesting, relevant topics that are going on. So I'm going to send it around so that everyone can introduce themselves. We've got a great panel, a great topic, some very recent, within the last 2 to 3 hours, news on evictions in California, and just a lot of interesting perspectives here that we're going to cover. So with that, Ajay Gupta, I'm an attorney. My practice focuses on litigation with an emphasis on bankruptcy, insolvency, and real estate matters. I've been doing this for a while. I think I'm pretty good at it. And so we'll kick this around to Jake, who's on my left on my screen, which means very little to the rest of you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jacob Ayres. I am an associate with Gupta Evans. I do real estate litigation as well as business litigation, and I also specialize in counseling cannabis companies, both on the regulatory and litigation side as well. Happy to be a part of this panel, hopefully get to talk about some of the more arcane legal side of things as we go through this conversation. And I will pass it over to Chris Evans.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Evans. I'm a partner at Gupta Evans and Associates, along here with AJ and Jake. And I'm a business and real estate litigation attorney. Handle plenty of things between business owners and the disputes they find themselves in, but more often the last few months, it's been much more real estate focused. The ever-changing landscape of the real estate litigation world we're going in right now that we'll dive into shortly here. Glad to be here.
Star, why don't you go next?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Star Hughes-Gorup with Hughes Marino. We are the largest tenant-only commercial real estate company in California and throughout the West Coast. I'm really chiming in here from a commercial standpoint with a focus on office, retail, industrial, lab space, and how tenants are being impacted by all of this craziness. So happy to be here.
And then we'll move it over to Manish.
Hi, everyone. My name is Manish Garg. I am the doctor on the panel. I'm an emergency medicine doctor. I'm a professor of emergency medicine. I was on the front lines during COVID in New York City. And my specialty is really in training of emergency medicine doctors. And I do a lot of international work, taking medical teams internationally to try to help promote health equity. And also understanding about this virus. And my role here today is to try to set the stage for what this virus is and has done, and maybe what the prospects are for the future. Very excited to be here today.
Steve, you want to jump in there?
Thank you, AJ. My name is Stephen Wener. I am a residential real estate broker working for a company called EXP. And I've been in this business for about 27 years. And again, none of us have really experienced the pandemic before. So it's really interesting to see what's been going on in the residential space and trying to understand all of this as it's ever changing. So thank you for having me, AJ.
Great. Well, thank everyone for being here today. I want to give you guys just a broad agenda of what we're going to be doing here. We're going to start out with Manish, and I know it's a little bit unusual to have a doctor of emergency medicine, but Manish, I'm fortunate enough to have Manish on the panel because we're actually college roommates, so he had to do it. But I feel like any conversation about COVID has to start with a common understanding of what it is and how long it's going to be here. So, and quite frankly, he just has some interesting perspectives on things that I wanted to share with a broader audience. And I thought that it was just lost with the conversations that we were having about it. So I'm really excited to have him. So we're going to open with that. And then afterwards, we're going to shift into the real estate component of this very, very quickly with Chris. And Chris is going to talk about the prior two bills that we're going through, the latest and greatest that happened this afternoon, and what that means for landlords and tenants and banks even moving forward. And we're going to kind of put in a little bit of a backdrop and just try and address what is the challenge with the eviction process specifically, and what is the financial situation of COVID specifically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that before we open it up to the panel for very, very specific question and answer type situations. So with that, and then at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to invite people in. If you've managed to live through this for an hour, I figure you can come on in and join the discussion. So what I would like you guys to do is in the chat window, which I really hope I've enabled, but I hope that you can just put a little note in there if you're interested in participating. I know I've talked to some of you already that are on this, that have said that they are interested, but if you would just drop a little chat, you know, that you want to join us towards the end, and hopefully we can get just a little bit of a town hall style meeting. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of people specifically. I know specifically with Chris and Manish, it's going to be more questions than answers, because that's just the way it works. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Manish, and he's going to describe a little bit about his experiences and where he sees this thing going.
All right, thank you, Ajay. As the doctor on the panel with a number of different attorneys, I feel compelled to have some sort of disclaimer that the viewpoints expressed are my own and don't represent my institutions. And I'm not here to talk to you today about medical advice, but hopefully talk to you a little bit about science. So I was asked to set the stage for this conversation as the source of all these problems, be it eviction, back to school, economic hardships. I mean, they're all coming from the virus. About 6 million infections, over 180,000 deaths right now in the United States. The US and international death rate is somewhere around 3+%, being a California webinar, and specifically San Diego County. I looked at those numbers, and we're looking at probably just under 2% mortality rate for both. So it's about, I think, 1.7% for San Diego, 1.8% the last time I checked. And interestingly, I think it's important, normally I would never do this, but I think it's important that when I talk about science and public health, the politicians have kind of drawn and divided lines. The reality is I'm here to promote patients and families and science, but some of that public health and science has been shifted a little bit left because of the way the politics have kind of gone. But I think that's important as it plays into this. So I just want you to know that I'm an independent. I have voted for either side in elections because I think I want to have the best candidate. My experience. So I saw the devastation of the virus up close. If I could take you back with me to New York City in March and April, it was really pandemonium. I saw death and dying up really close. I am the residency training program director for emergency medicine residents. I have 48 residents. About half of my residents were either sick or in contact isolation or quarantined during the pandemic at its worst. I mean, we're talking about 350 like pulseless calls for the EMS systems for cardiac arrest when normally there were 50 in a day. I mean, these are the kinds of numbers that we were seeing. One of the sites that I work at had the most visits recorded in the country from a single day. We had 200 to 300 plus folks that were possible COVID patients. And at that time, it was like 90+% of the patients who were tested ended up being positive for COVID. And it was pretty taxing, both emotionally, physically. I had an Iraqi war vet who, well, it was a US war vet who served in Iraq, who basically told me that what he was dealing with here as one of my residents was harder than anything he had to deal with when he was in war, that you could not see with this virus like you could see your enemy, that it's on our soil and that you have to bring it home to your families. These are all things that played in our minds. Now, interestingly, virologists have said that the virus has mutated from a higher death rate when it was in New York City to a less contagious one. So it was higher death rate or higher death capacity and less contagious, to now it's mutated to a more, like a less contagious one. And it has, sorry, let me rephrase that. It was a higher death rate that was less contagious. And now in New York City, it's mutated to be overall less death rate, but more contagious. And I think it's important to note that the virus that went from the one that went to the New York City, kind of the East Coast, at least the virologists are telling us that came from Europe, most likely from Italy. And the one that we saw in California, they tell us, came from China. And that one tended to be a little less death rate, but more contagious. But the reality is it can mutate again. And we've learned about this virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that it has a pretty elegant design. The first SARS virus, SARS-CoV-1, the one that was almost a decade ago, killed more, but you had symptoms when you were able to transmit the virus. And I think that's really important. So when you became sick, that's when you were contagious. And now the elegant design of this particular virus suggests that potentially you can transmit the virus before you get sick. And that's one of the reasons why we're really struggling with it in the United States. I don't want to get too complicated about the virus itself because I think it's past the scope of our particular webinar, but there's a spike protein on this. That's what gives it the corona shape, that kind of like shape with all the little spikes that come off of it. And what happens with it is that it can get into any system in your body. It preferentially goes to the lungs and your upper airways, but it can go to your gastrointestinal tract, it can go to your kidneys, it can go to your brain. And so it goes to all different organs. So as a clinician, it's really difficult to figure out who had it. And every patient that was coming in, we were stunned when we found out that patients, who fainted, they ended up having coronavirus. A patient with back pain had coronavirus. Obviously patients with diarrhea, coronavirus. So we ended up figuring out that stroke and heart attack patients, it ended up being coronavirus. And that made it really difficult for us to manage. And then later on, we started seeing this concept of a cytokine storm. This is an immune pathway storm that we saw in kids and now we're seeing in adults. It's a real problem. So it's difficult to figure out this virus when it's coming at you. And what do people get? 0 to 3 days, they get little or no symptoms, but remember, they're contagious. At 3 to 7 days, they tend to have symptoms. And there was this big talk about asymptomatics and how there would be a lot of asymptomatic spread. What we found, at least working in our employees, that it ended up being a small fraction, probably around 3%. In kids right now, which is one of the big concerns, it's under 1% that are asymptomatic that have it. So if you have symptoms, you're likely to be the ones propagating the disease. Yet you can have the disease 0 to 3 days before you develop symptoms, which is really where the problem is. At day 7 to 10, that's probably the worst potential risk time. And at days like 10 to 14, that's when hopefully you have recovery. There's this concept with the virus that it will spread to about 2 to 3 patients or 2 to 3 people if you have it. So in the ED, we don't have a lot to manage these patients that come in with coronavirus. We manage you with oxygen escalation. And many of these strategies put us at risk. We put these high flow prongs in your nose, or we put you on a machine to try to help you to breathe while you're awake, or if we have to intubate you, all of that aerosolizes the virus and that puts us at risk. So it's pretty tricky. If you do get intubated, then that's real problems. Patients all of a sudden now, you're talking about 3-4 weeks in the intensive care unit because it's hard to get folks off of the ventilator. Folks can get chest tubes, folks can get superimposed pneumonias. It becomes a real problem. And one of the things that I think is underrated about this virus is that chronic COVID infections, if you had no or mild symptoms, that's only about a third of the patients ended up with one persistent symptom when you had no or mild symptoms. And if you had moderate or severe symptoms, then you were like high 80s to low 90s with chronic diseases. So for anybody who will tell you that this is like the flu, that's kind of an uninformed.
Manish, can you talk to us a little bit about where this is going? I know we had talked a little bit about some of the testing, some of the tracking, some of the things that we were talking about there.
Yeah, sure. So the testing right now, there's a few different ways people get tested. You probably see that they do the PCR nasal swab. And what that does is we're replicating the virus in that machine. There's a blood test, which essentially is a testing for your immune response. And through that, we figure out whether a person's developed antibodies. And recently they came up with a saliva test. Hopefully that is promising for the future. Basically, you can take you can spit almost into a container, and they'll be easier to collect. There'll be more supplies. It'll be better to process. Hopefully ubiquitous, but right now the labor costs are about the same as the nasal swab test. It's just that it'll be easier eventually. So that'll be a good one. One of the problems we have is that there are testing delays. So right now, there are some places where you do the test and 7 days later you get your result. That's essentially useless for us in public health, and it's useless for the patients. And then there's inherent problems with the testing. There's a lot of false positives. and false negatives. And what that is a false positive is that you don't have the disease, but you test positive. Now you will get a little extra care there that way. So it's probably not as bad as the false negative, where you actually do have the disease and you test as negative. And both of those are at higher numbers than we'd really like at this point. There's not a lot of, there's no prophylaxis right now. So what that means is there's not a medicine I can take to protect myself from this. And some of the trials for therapies, like you had just asked, like the hydroxychloroquine, the studies have come out, and the initial study that showed maybe a little benefit now has essentially been debunked, at least here in this country. They use it in other countries, but per an article from New England Journal of Medicine, there's no benefit. Remdesivir, that's a medicine that a lot of folks know from the news and from the media. That's shown about a 15 to 11 day, so like a 4-day improvement. Again, no mortality benefit. So Health and Human Services from the government, they purchased out Gilead's supply for 3 months. I think it was July, August, September. They took about 90 to 100% of the world's supply of that, trying to help the US, but that actually caused an uproar internationally. Serum plasma, which you've probably heard about right now, this is the convalescent plasma. So essentially somebody else had COVID and they developed antibodies to COVID, and now they're taking that and they're trying to infuse it into you. And so that shows a benefit of about 3% if you get it early, and maybe 5% if you get it later. Unfortunately, the FDA had to retract their 35% relative risk statement. They actually said that 35 out of 100 people would get better, and that's not true. That's a relative risk data point that they gave. So they actually had to step back on that, because the actual risk, the absolute risk, was 3 to 5%. And then dexamethasone is a medicine that had 28-day survival. So 1 in 8 patients who got it, who were hospitalized, who were receiving oxygen, had benefit from that, which I think is really, really huge. It's super cheap, it's available, and it's something that we should really be thinking about. But really what does work? Masks work. Right now they're talking about how you can save 70,000 lives if we all start wearing masks. I think this study by Goldman Sachs showed that if we were to all wear masks appropriately, you would save 5% to our GDP. Physical distancing works, 6 feet, hand washing works, being outdoors works. In terms of vaccines, because I know that's a popular question, we're trying to find something that's safe, effective, and that's cost effective to everybody. But there are multiple in development right now. The goal is to try to get to herd immunity. And in order to get to herd immunity, experts will tell you need to get 70 to 80% to achieve this. There's been some recent data that says maybe it could be less, but it really depends on how much of the community has the disease to begin with. But one of the challenges that we've had is that when the semantics are Operation Warp Speed, or having Russia state that they would skip phase 3 trials, those are really problematic to folks considering the vaccine. When they've surveyed people about taking the vaccine, 50% of people on multiple surveys said that they won't take the vaccine because they want time to see if the vaccine will work. There are a number of anti-vaxxers. I mean, north of you all in Orange County is kind of a historical place for that. And then there's historical trust. There are folks who are Black and brown who have been tested on inappropriately over the history of science, and they're hesitant to take these vaccines, and rightfully so. And what are we learning about immunity? We're learning more about this. We realized recently there was a bunch of sailors that had positive COVID prior to going on this ship up in Washington State. And they came back, and almost everybody on the ship ended up with COVID, and they didn't. So it is kind of proof of immunity. The original SARS disease, the one way back a decade, started waning immunity at 4 months and lasted almost until 2 years. Right now, we don't know what the time course is for this particular virus, but sadly this week, somebody got reinfected for the second time. This person went from Asia to Europe. So they got it originally in China, and then they went to Europe later on for vacation, and they got it a second time. So that's kind of concerning from a public health standpoint. So what does this all mean for medical forecasting? Well, we don't really know how long this will last.
I'm going to ring the bell on you here, Manish, because we're getting to that point where we want to move on with this portion. Do you have any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is the final things I would say. It's just that should be a human versus virus thing, but it's not. It's being human versus human. And whenever people ask me how long this is going to last, I would tell them, oh, it'll probably be 3 to 4 months if we do this right. but doing it right for us was only about 50% doing it right, like it was 95% doing it right in other countries. So unfortunately, it keeps getting kicked down the road. So it's probably about a year plus. I don't think we're going to get back to a normal. It'll rather be like a new normal, like we keep talking about.
So you know, and you and I have talked about this briefly, but you know, you were saying that, you know, if this disease continues to evolve, there's the possibility that the new normal becomes the normal. Masks become ubiquitous for the long term. If something happens with, you know, if the immunity fades at 2 years and we can't get on a good vaccination schedule, I mean, you know, a year to 2 years is not only likely but probable.
Yeah, some people aren't really mounting the antibody response even after infection, and that's a real problem. And so it's hard to know how everybody is going to respond to this. So yes, I think there is a real good chance that it's going to be there. And since this virus has this elegant design where before it was kind of not as like deadly for the entire globe, and now it's getting there, one would think that that would be a continued progression of these coronaviruses.
Great. Chris, I'm going to hand it off to you, where you can talk a little bit about the prior two bills that we're going through and the new one today that they created, the 3088, and what that means for homeowners and for renters.
Absolutely. So a lot's been going on. I'm gonna try my best to kind of condense this and keep it general. Just some context as to what we're all facing. I mean, I don't think anyone's disputing that, you know, tenants and landlords have been affected by this drastically. Economies have been decimated. You have people losing jobs. Unemployment is up. The UC Berkeley analysis estimates that 1 million households have lost their job due to the pandemic. On the flip side, 25% of small landlords have already had to borrow money to meet mortgage payments. So some relief is necessary. It's just a matter of balancing interests here, right? Since about April or late March, early April, there was the Judicial Council rule that was a whole statewide eviction freeze. No evictions, commercial or residential, COVID or non-COVID affected people could go through, and that expires on next Tuesday, September 1st.
And they just passed the expiration. They were going to hold it out for 3 months, and then I believe it was September 13th or 14th. They said, "Hey, we're going to end this at the end of the month." August 14th. They decided to end it September 1st. Is that right? Correct.
Yeah. So, and a month and a half or so before that, they'd already tried, got a bunch of pushback from tenant advocacy groups saying we need more time to put something together. Judicial Council came in a few weeks ago. Enough's enough. This isn't up for us to decide. The legislature needs to do something. So obviously the eviction freeze served the interest of the tenants. It allowed them to remain in their homes for a time period until now. But you've had landlords, though, not getting any rent and not being able to get any relief, even if their tenants are not affected by COVID. They can't get possession back of their property. And that's even commercial tenants as well, commercial landlords. So we had two bills. They were, until earlier this afternoon, 1436 and 1410. There's kind of been two trains of thought that's kind of come out of this legislative process. There's been, let's try and figure out a longer term solution, and then let's just figure out a stopgap, kick it down the road. Maybe some federal stimulus money will come in. Maybe some other miracle will come in. Maybe the disease will get better. But as Manish is saying, it doesn't sound like it's happening anytime soon. 1410 was a longer term solution problem. They were trying to essentially remove the landlords from the equation, give them tax credits for any deferred rent that they weren't going to be paid, and set up an agreement between the tenant and the state in which the tenants would start paying back the deferred rent beginning in 2024. And the tax credits wouldn't be going to the landlord until 2024. So the time period was largely so the FTB, who would be monitoring and facilitating this entire thing, could get their arms around it and get processes in place to kind of coordinate it. There's a lot more nuance to it than that, but that was essentially what it was, and that's off the table now, and it's been off the table for a bit. 1436 was more of the stopgap. It was largely trying to do what the Judicial Council eviction freeze did, just on a more formal level. It would halt evictions for 90 days until after the state of emergency, or until April 1st of next year. All it would require for, you could serve a notice on a tenant for non-payment of rent. The tenant all it would have to do is respond with an attestation, not under penalty of perjury, saying, I have been COVID affected, I cannot pay my rent in full. End of story, cannot evict, cannot terminate tenancy, cannot do anything. And both of these bills, I'd say this is only applicable to residential tenants. There has been no bills right now, at least in the immediate, for commercial tenant relief or landlord relief. That then is merely subject to the San Diego local ordinance, which I can get into shortly if we have time. But 1436, it was largely seen as, okay, it's a stopgap. It'll get us to when Congress can get back in session. It'll buy us more or less until next April, and until the legislature figures things out and figures out a more longer term solution. That has essentially been reworked. There's been compromises and compromises over the last few weeks. And what we have as of a few hours ago is AB 3088, the Tenant, Homeowner, and Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act of 2020. It is a mouthful. So it's essentially like 4036, it's a stopgap, and it has not been passed yet. It's being voted on Monday. It needs a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate, which is by no means a guarantee. It needs a 2/3 vote as opposed to a simple majority because this is it's an urgency bill. It needs to get passed, voted on Monday and signed either Monday or Tuesday. So generally speaking, it would allow evictions. This bill only applies to residential tenants and landlords. It would allow evictions to begin next week, as are currently slated, given the rising of the Judicial Council eviction freeze. But in non-payment of rent cases, tenants would have the ability to stop that if they can declare under penalty of perjury, so that's the difference between the 4036, that they are, quote, have a COVID-19 related financial distress. And there's a variety of definitions for this in the bill, but it's essentially my income is lower, or my expenses are higher for COVID related reasons. So not a huge bar to overcome, but they're still making this representation. Even before, so if they declare this, then the landlord cannot evict them for rent that has been accrued from March through January 31st. If rent is due from September to January 31st, though, tenants will be on the hook for paying 25% of that balance. So they would essentially get this notice, which is now a 15-day notice, not a 3-day notice, to pay or quit. There would be a form declaration of financial hardship that they could fill out if applicable. And if it's for rent within this September to January transition period, they would have to pay that by January 31st. So it's not due within a certain time frame of the notice being given. It just needs to be paid by January 31st. So what this essentially creates is a bubble of protection for these residential tenants until February, whereas no eviction or unlawful detainer judgment could be entered in that time period. As far as the landlord's relief, some of these other bills had potential mortgage forbearance requirements. There was large pushback from the banks that kind of nixed that really quick. So what this does is that it converts. So if you have unpaid, if it's a landlord is pursuing residential rent from a tenant, that rent, while it cannot be a basis for eviction anymore because they have financial hardship, the landlord can pursue that rent in small claims court. So it gives landlords a more expedited method to obtain rent as opposed to filing a simple breach of contract case, which could take 12 to 18 months like any other case. It's not a UD in that expedited sense, but it's small claims. They've expanded the jurisdictional amount for that court, which used to be $10,000. So you can pursue it in that realm, but you cannot do it until next March. So there's a ton of, you're seeing this pattern of, okay, things can't happen until March of next year. And it's allowing the legislator, the thought is that the legislator will come back in January and figure out amendments or additional longer term solutions for these landlords and tenants. And then additionally, and this is kind of just, might be meaningless, but landlords, borrowers that are applying for forbearance, which they can do if their tenants aren't paying them their payments, they will be required to be given a specific reason if they are denied mortgage forbearance and that landlord is affected by COVID. So, whether that is just, illusory, maybe, but it requires a little more specificity from the mortgage servicer to provide a reason why they're being denied. There's some more nuance to it. I don't want to go too deep into it now, but the one part that I will say is that if you're a residential tenant and you're saying you have financial hardship, that's the end of story. Unless you're a quote unquote high income earner or high income tenant, which is 130% of the median income in San Diego. If you are that individual tenant, you have to provide proof of this hardship, whether that's a W-2, whether it's a termination letter, anything like that, that shows your income is not what it used to be, and you cannot pay rent as it's due. And finally, the big part of this that kind of makes this somewhat applicable to commercial tenants is that whereas these local communities have had their eviction moratorium in place, San Diego's eviction moratorium applies to residential and commercial tenants. It essentially allows them to provide proof of hardship that they cannot be evicted then for non-payment of rent as a result of that hardship. That expires September 30th, 2020, with rent then being due in December 2020. This 3888 bill would not allow those local communities, San Diego, LA, wherever, to extend the term of those moratoriums now. So it kind of puts a pin in those, it kind of puts everyone on the same playing field from a state level, and these local communities cannot be doing their own things at least until next February. So there's a lot of specifics that go into this, and a lot of it's a little confusing, a little vague, and a little open-ended, but in large part, it allows tenants to seek the protection for non-payment of rent if they have been COVID affected. Sometimes you have to prove it, sometimes you don't, but it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out next week for sure.
Cool. Well, that's a mouthful. So I know that I know that you had to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time, and Manish, you did too. So I appreciate you guys kind of trying to compact a lot of information in a very short period of time. I do want to talk. I know I see a couple of questions here from, I think Joan Selleck had, the eviction. Can you evict right now? And just to summarize the answer to that question, you couldn't evict until September 1st. September 1st, they weren't issuing any what we would call a summons in the legal field. So that prevented you. You could file your claim, but you couldn't actually do anything with it because you can't serve somebody without a summons. So they'd put a freeze on all summons, commercial, COVID-related, non-COVID-related. You couldn't evict at all. I don't know about small claims court because I don't practice there. Someone else may know the answer to whether that's open or not. So they'd put a freeze on that. And just following up on 3088, which is likely to be passed on Monday, unless you all get on the phone after this. But it's likely to be passed on Monday. It's going to freeze summons on all what they're calling COVID-related evictions for residential, not commercial. Commercial is going to open up. Non-COVID is going to open up, and even COVID-related that does not follow the formula that they've set forth that Chris just outlined is going to open up. So that's kind of the short answer to that question. And with that, I'm going to jump into my portion of the program a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to set the stage for our discussion. And there's a couple of things you have to understand when we design this. It was designed to say, hey, what's the right answer for this? And really, there's kind of a two-pronged approach that you can have with this. And prong number one is either you drown this thing in money, right, which has been the answer up until this point, and you say, look, you get a car, everyone gets everything that they want, and we're going to supplement unemployment, and we're going to make sure there's enough money to pay the landlord, and then the landlord can pay the tenant, and then that's done. And I wanted to talk about some data that I've kind of drummed up on my own about how much money we've spent on this. And the fact is that this is a state court problem at this point in time, and there may not be funds available to do that. And I guess that's bearing itself out in the 3088 that we're seeing. And the second thing that I want to talk about is why are we so concerned about unemployment? And so I'm going to start with the second question, actually. And so just so you know, there's some basic statistics that you have to understand about unemployment. And by and large, for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, the impact of COVID has been masked and somewhat muted, whether that's through receiving government funding, stimulus checks, through to stimulus to the unemployment situation, through, PPP money, through there's many of us where we haven't actually had to feel the direct impact of COVID. And what we do have, though, in California, and this is statistics that I don't think are subject to a lot of reasonable dispute, and that is, the unemployment rate right now in California is about 13.3%. And if you compare that with historical norms, it's really, really bad. I mean, I just, and statistically, everyone kind of knows this intuitively, but the industries that have been disproportionately affected are typically going to be the restaurant, the front-facing retail type restaurant areas, and those make up about 20% of employees. And I think it's a little bit higher for California, but makes up about 20% of employees. And these are the people that typically are the renters. So when these people lose their job, these are the guys that are typically paycheck to paycheck, and they're the ones that maybe don't have the ability to pay rent at that point in time. And based on estimates, they're saying that in the US, there's about 30 to 40 million that are quote unquote at risk for eviction. That breaks down to, in California, it's about 4 to 5 million that are at risk for eviction. And in San Diego County, and I just kind of backed into the San Diego County number, but that's based on a population of 3 million. That's about 300,000 people that are at risk for eviction. And eviction and homelessness are two different things. But if you assume that out of that 300,000 at risk, that leaves 25,000 people homeless, to give you context, and this potentially, the current homeless population of San Diego is somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. So that's the concern here, is that if the floodgates open, then we're creating a homeless crisis potentially in the next 12 months. And, at least on our call, like that's really what we're trying to say here is that, look, at least San Diego, $450 a week on unemployment that's going to run out in December isn't enough to make rent and put food on the table. So it's going to be a problem, and if we don't actually try and address it, and that's the question though, is if that's the problem and you're not able to drown this thing in money, which I don't think we can spend another $4 trillion. I'm going to kind of leave that off of the discussion point because we are getting a little later than I would have liked to. Then it's with the assumption that there's no more money to give at some point in time at this point, who bears the brunt of this? Is it going to be spread amongst, there's really three parties at that point in time. You've got the tenants, which again, you've got the homeless potential problem there. And maybe we're okay with a little homelessness because that's the nature of the beast, and then we're going to have to deal with what to do about that. Is it going to be the landlords, who are eventually going to not be able to pay their mortgages, which is going to lead to a foreclosure crisis, which maybe we stay that, and that leads to a banking crisis. So where are we going to spread this? What's the right answer? And that's really where I wanted to shape this discussion, actually push it forward. So, and again, contextually, now that we have the bill in hand, I guess, so to speak, then that also changes the nature of the discussion. But, the way that I look at this, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if we're looking at those three pots that we have to draw from, they really put this on the doorstep of the landlord. I mean, the amount of options that they've given for tenants to say, it's COVID related. Next, I'm going to sign off on this affidavit. That's a unilateral get out of jail free card. I'll see you guys in February of next year, at which time we'll see what happens. Okay, and that really leaves landlords holding the bag at that point in time. I know we've got Rachel on here somewhere. I'm sure she's boiling about this. So that leaves landlords holding the bag. And so with that, I want to turn this over to Stephen to talk a little bit about what it is. I mean, how do you balance that? Landlords, I guess, on the one hand, you're facing a homelessness crisis potentially. And on the other hand, I think legislators are looking at this and they're saying, well, hey, these landlords have afforded or enjoyed serious appreciation in their property values. We've maintained property values by dropping interest rates to almost zero. I'm sorry, Rachel just chimed in on the chat window. So, we've maintained property value, at least for residential homeowners, by keeping interest rates at like practically nothing. So why not pass this burden onto the landlords, at least for a little while?
I mean, nobody wants to be left
holding the bag right at the end of the day. So that's the first thing. When you're trying to be entrepreneurial and you're investing in property, you're taking more or less a calculated risk. Cap rates, understanding what you're investing. I mean, you're going through a lot and you're investing a lot. And then you bring a tenant in, and that tenant couldn't afford a property per se, not in all cases. And then they come on in and they've made an arrangement. You have a legal binding contract. And this legal binding contract was something that two parties concluded would work out. So now to all of a sudden say that a landlord becomes liable and they're the only ones that are going to be left holding the bag. Again, I'm from Canada, so I'm a little bit more liberal minded, but I'm also entrepreneurial in the sense that, okay, I have to work for certain things. I understand the pandemic came and threw a monkey wrench into a lot of these different things. But at the same token, if people are getting unemployment from the government and they were getting the extra $600 a week, which is gone now, but they were being supplemented. My question is it why does it the person who invests, why is it the business person, the entrepreneur that gets left holding the bag? And with this potential bill that Chris is talking about, if it does get passed on Monday, you know, thinking now that there is no more forbearance, and you know, they can decline you and give you a reason, but who knows what the reason is, just like the tenant who can now say, hey, I'm affected, and maybe they're not. And how overwhelming will that be to the court system? The same way PPP loans, right, have been as far as forgiveness. There's so much recourse that is going to come down the pipe no matter what gets passed. But right now it looks like the burden is just coming directly to the person who struggled to save money, buy an investment property, put a tenant in it, wrote a contract out, but now they're left holding the bag, which, I mean, there's so much to be said about it. And the other thing is now, because again, in residential, I deal with 1 to 4 units. I'm not commercial, 5+. But if you look at what's going to happen as far as, you can call this force majeure as well, right? So how will the landlords then be coming back and fighting all of this? And will they be suing the state? So it's so hard to say what the right answer is. And one of the things we spoke about offline yesterday, and you just put a little bit of, you know, salt on, hey, maybe a little bit of homelessness is good. But there have been so many radical shifts in how we've had to deal with life, from homeschooling to, you know, you're not commuting anymore for work, office space, people are reconfiguring it because they don't need it anymore. And we were talking about, hey, if you had to live out of a van or a truck or bought one of those sprinters and downsized and pivoted your life because you have to adjust. I mean, I believe that some people are doing that. I mean, I've visibly seen a lot of people doing that, actually. I know a few people living out of their cars. And life pivots. But again, who has to be left holding the bag? And even if they are right now, will they fight it? Absolutely. Is a landlord going to take that without swinging? I doubt it. So no matter what happens, I think on any front, it's going to be incredible to see what happens to the court systems. So,
well, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about takings, you know, time permitting, and if people don't yell at me too much. But so are you saying that the prejudice to landlords, in your opinion, is worth more than the potential homelessness situation that we're facing? Is that like, or are you simply saying, like, I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but like, do you not believe that there's a potential homelessness situation and that maybe the numbers are overblown? Or is it that you're like, okay, so we have to deal with homelessness, contract rights should prevail over homelessness? Or are you maybe saying something entirely different, like we need to find a different way to address this?
it's a different way to address it. I'm not saying that you just have to favor the landlord, but if the tenant is more or less going to walk out of this without any recourse, and you do have a legal binding agreement, right? And the landlord can't go back to their bank and say, hey, they're not paying me. This was the arrangement. Is it unconstitutional that I can't even enforce this agreement because I've now been told that there's this ratification that I just have to be left holding the bag? What do I do? So
yeah, it's just, and we've said this before in our pre-discussions, but to me, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, that homeowner has enjoyed very, very low interest rates. I mean, in theory, like couldn't the federal government or somebody say, hey, look, no more free lunch for you guys. We're going to tack, you know, a 6% interest rate on this, like historically is what it was. You know, property values in California will drop back down instead of $700 a square foot in La Mesa, it'll go back down to $300. And you know what? Instead of your house being worth $700,000, it's worth, you know, $350, like it probably should be. People can afford it, and we take that extra revenue and we use it to shore up our homelessness problem. Like, I mean, it seems to me like there's, you know, the surgeon, the cure in this case, you know, could be much worse for a group that has like really benefited from low interest rates. It's almost been a windfall for homeowners, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, right? I don't disagree that the interest rates are low. There's been a windfall, but people still have to take risk when they invest, right? Whether they buy
How much
a house.
risk is a home in California?
Hey man, that's a loaded question. But still, you don't know what the circumstances are that people still have to go through on a day-to-day basis. Prior to COVID, right? There was still stuff going on. There were still tenants that weren't paying. There were things that were happening, and there was a way to either evict somebody, get recourse. I mean, there was a process. Now you're just being apparently told what to do. So, I mean, there's a big difference in that. And that's not, I'm not saying to be discriminatory about evicting somebody. My heart bleeds for all of that. On our offline discussion, I mentioned the other day that when I was working the foreclosures back in the REO boom, and I had to talk to homeowners and negotiate cash for keys, you know, they had to leave their home. I'm not saying that, you know, people that are entrepreneurial are heartless whatsoever, or the job that I do, you want to be heartless. But at the same time, to what end, right? So that's the hard part. And I think this roundtable is trying to find that solution. And even my business, if somebody wants to buy 1 to 4 units and invest, now I have to tell them, hey, guess what? And all realtors are going to need to know that as well. Hey, if you're potentially selling this as an investment property, you know, and you want to buy this and put a tenant in, you need to beware, right? So what will that do? And I'm not saying about values or whatever. I'm not concerned about values. They go up and down. But it's about decision making based on, hey, I had pre-planned for this, I saved for this, I'm buying, I'm doing this, and now what? I'm left holding the bag.
Gotcha.
So
let's talk a little bit about commercial, because I know commercial's gotten, speaking of holding the bag, there was no considerations for commercial. Commercial's going as if there's no homeless. And from what Chris talked about, some of the protections for COVID that exist in the San Diego ordinance are going to stay there, but they're not going to allow those stays to be extended. So what does that mean for commercial properties, commercial property owners, as well as tenants?
Unfortunately, commercial tenants have really been left holding the bag in this whole situation. And it was a bit disappointing to see that commercial was carved out of the bill that Chris mentioned. Basically, the commercial tenants have had to rely on different city and county ordinances throughout the state to try and grapple with the huge blows that COVID has had on their businesses. And every city and county seems to do it differently. The last I checked, I had tallied up about 28 different ordinances that applied to commercial tenants throughout the state. And some of them have expired, some of them are still in existence. In the city of San Diego, it's been a more beneficial relief mechanism for commercial tenants than other cities. Basically, commercial tenants had the ability to defer rent starting in April and ending at the end of September. Defer rent for a period of time, which was just extended to the end of this year. It still needs to be ratified by the mayor, but as of December 30th, tenants will need to be current on their rent and have paid back up to 6 months of deferred rent. The challenge with that is very few commercial tenants are going to be in a position to pay that back at the end of the year. Things haven't significantly improved from what we're seeing, and they're going to be stuck paying a pretty.
But why do people care, right? Like, I mean, and like I put this to you when in our earlier discussion, and it's just, this is not residential. There's not going to be a homelessness situation. If Bob's Taco Shop is owned by Bill tomorrow, as a consumer, as an economist, isn't this just creative destruction? Isn't this just, hey, look, this is the risk you took opening up a shop. The landowner took the risk. I don't care if the bank owns it. I mean, the taco shop's still going to be there in 12 months. This is a question of ownership. And like, from my perspective, it's seamless. From an economics perspective, it's kind of seamless. It's like, you know what, run them through a bankruptcy, go squeegee it out, and then we'll come out on the other end. We'll go do something with it, right? Why do I care about that?
Well, the challenge is that companies are being put in a really tough situation with having to decide to honor their leases that they had already signed or keep their team members, their employees on staff. And that it's all so interconnected, but these businesses, by not having relief or flexibility provided by their landlords, they are having to decide, okay, I'm going to furlough X number of team members because I need to keep paying my rent, and not having that flexibility is really damaging to these companies. So I think it's a brutal situation. Neither landlords nor tenants did anything to deserve this, but we really need to see more of a shared sacrifice, in my opinion, whereas right now tenants are having to pay the brunt of this. And if landlords were able to partake even a little bit in the huge pain and the bankruptcies and the defaults that commercial tenants are going through, I think that would be very beneficial to keeping more businesses afloat and keeping more people employed.
Have you, with your tenants, have you had many of them renegotiate leases with their landlords, or have many of them, or most of them, been relying on these moratoriums, out of curiosity?
Many are relying on moratoriums. In the retail world, there has been a little bit more of a push to renegotiate leases, which is obviously very appreciated by those tenants. Some of the largest landlords, like the Irvine Company, for example, they were one of the first ones out of the gate to help their tenants with their retail tenants, specifically with rent deferment, but also renegotiating leases to keep them afloat. There hasn't been any consistent approach by landlords in the office sector, which is troubling. We have seen a lot of stories and been involved in a lot of situations where landlords are open to renegotiating leases and providing a little bit of immediate relief, but almost like a balloon payment that tenants will have to bear the brunt of down the road next year. Not very advantageous deals to be signing, because it just shifts a really bad situation to this time next year. Or landlords are wanting tenants to add 5 more years of term at top of the market rate, which doesn't make sense and is hurts those companies in the long run. Thanks,
Star. Jake, this one's for you. And I'd like you to kind of lead a discussion on this issue, but talk to the panelists about what a taking would be, and whether you can, whether some of these measures push up against a Fifth Amendment issue here, or even the California constitutional issue. So, so just I'll turn it over to you to explain what that would mean and what some of these challenges are based on these the moratorium that's in place.
Right. So I can't really speak to the California constitutional issue, because the look I took at this was more geared toward the
Sure.
federal constitutional taking issue, because that's what people think of when they think of a taking, right? But just for those of you that don't know, we got to go all the way back to constitutional law and law school and talk about takings real quick. So a taking is where it's from the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It's where there can't be a taking of your property without just compensation. And I'm paraphrasing the exact clause, but that's essentially what it is. The idea being that the government can't take your property without providing some level of compensation for what they've taken from you. So in the traditional per se taking, that's a physical taking of your land. Those are like government condemnation proceedings, right? The type of taking we're talking about here is a regulatory taking, where if you were an aggrieved business owner, of which there are many, right, that want to go after the state, the governor or the county or whoever is the target of your frustration, and whoever is publishing the order that you're contending is a regulatory taking, you're basically saying that you've been deprived of the use of your property, so much so by the regulation that you've effectively been deprived of the value of it. And that's kind of where the type of taking claim that would arise in this context. So the question is then, okay, if you are a gym owner or a restaurant owner or a wedding venue operator, and the county of San Diego, pursuant to the higher order from Governor Newsom, says that you can't have a gathering, you can't have indoor dining, you can't run a gym, point blank period. Is that a regulatory taking such that you can then sue and have a viable claim against the government? And I took a look at some of the case law that's already starting to come out around these issues, and it's pretty interesting because, the bottom line is that it is probably not a taking. And that's because there's a case from the Supreme Court called Jacobson, which is where in times of national emergency, constitutional scrutiny over government actions is reduced. So the idea being that the government has to meet a lower bar to justify what they've done in order to survive constitutional challenges to their actions. And there's already a case in the Central District of California, right here in the Ninth Circuit, that has said that the Jacobson rule applies to the COVID-19 executive order by Governor Newsom. So, I mean, obviously that's not binding on other courts in the Ninth Circuit, but I think that sort of gives.
Is that an appellate level case?
No, it's Central District, so
okay.
Just a district court. Because I think these cases are so new, I don't think any of them have advanced to the Ninth Circuit yet, but they will. And we'll find out really quick, but I think that is already kind of putting you there.
Segueing into the issue at hand, which is the bill as proposed to be passed, from a landlord perspective, aren't you depriving me of my property, my right to take possession of my property at that point in time? And are you saying that the Jacobson rule at that point in time would probably, assuming that becomes the standard, allow the legislature? I'm gonna make you put out a judicial opinion on this, Jake. So I'm gonna the Jacobson rule as it stands right now.
I mean, Jacobson is not. The Jacobson rule isn't the end of the inquiry. So that is a relaxed standard. But so then you go into the Penn Central factors, if you remember those from law school.
Right.
So the question is, right? It's if it's a regulatory taking, the question is, has the temporary regulation denied all viable economic use of the property? So that's the threshold question. Then assuming that the answer to that is yes, you have to weigh three factors. Those factors are economic impact of the regulation on the claimant, the extent to which the regulation has interfered with distinct investment-backed expectations, and third, the character of the governmental action. So just to give you an example, because I think this is the best case that's come out about this yet, there was a hotel in Palm Springs that was trying to get a TRO enjoining the government from stopping them from operating as a hotel, because obviously the order has a significant impact on them. And the court says that even if you meet those first two prongs of that test, the third prong outweighs it. And they go on a long. What
was the third prong again?
The third prong is the character of the governmental action. So the court basically says that because the government is acting to save American lives, that outweighs whatever impact is on you as the landowner. And they cite a bunch of wartime cases and some hazardous materials cases as well. So that's the general idea. And I think that even if you are a justifiably aggrieved landlord, you're going to run up against this jurisprudence very quickly, unless there's a change of heart at the Ninth Circuit level, which I doubt. Of course, it's probably going to be a lot different in different circuits, but I really just surveyed the Ninth.
But could you argue that, is preventing eviction and possession of property and getting a rent, is that saving American lives in the same way that, look, this gym is going to spread this virus in a very bad way. We got to shut this down. Isn't that a different conversation?
Right. I mean, yeah, because I guess I'm talking about a regulation that as it affects a hotel, right?
Right.
Where there's a significant concern about people person to person spreading the virus in a giant building, an interior building. And I mean, that's a good question, because a lot of these cases, the cases that have come out are people that were like existentially threatened by it, like gyms, hotels. Your average landlord isn't going to go to the courts this early on so that there's already a case that I can look at on Lexis. You know what I mean? So, I mean, yeah, I think there's an argument that could be made that, yeah, the character of the eviction freeze is, but I mean, look, going back to the whole, if the part of the justification of the eviction freeze is to prevent homelessness, which in turn prevents, a George Romero situation out on the streets, like, then you can make that argument. But
good point.
It's untested. So I see your point.
Before I bring people into this, and I guess I'll ask the attendees to raise their hand if they want to be in on the group discussion. So I've got one last question for Manish, and I just think it's topical. Is a legislative policy that favors landlords over tenants and creates homelessness, is it inherently racist?
Ooh, wow, that is you're putting me on the spot there, Ajay. Well, I think that you have to take a look at some of the historical structural creations that we have. And I mean, a system that propagates the status quo to set up and maintain wealth and power to those with means and resources, and even potentially voting power. I mean, there's an argument that could be made for that. And that kind of structure has historically served certain demographics. I mean, a couple comments, if I can now evade your question, just with the gym thing.
Feel free, Manish. The guy put you in a tough spot.
the gym.
It's everywhere, guys. We got it. It's like,
no, but it's
right,
tough.
right.
I mean, it's tough. The gym thing, though, you're right. I think that's very different. I mean, I'm looking at the webinar chat, and there's certainly a lot of polarized opinions, which I think is good and healthy for this back and forth discussion about how many people are gaming the system. And I think that's a real important thing for us to try to figure, for at least policymakers to try to figure out. That's challenging for us in medicine. There are people who come in for pain medications, and there's a lot of concern about, is this person just trying to score some pain medicines? And when you look at the actual data on it, because they've studied it, it ends up being somewhere around 1 to 2%. And if we make broad generalizations and sweeping policy based on that 1 to 2%, unfortunately, sometimes there's just some necessary evils that need to be there. With regards to gyms, that's a crazy, I mean, all those people potentially aerosolizing, that to me is a very different situation to me, even than in a hotel, like you're talking about, Jake. I think that's a very different thing. But homelessness is not benign, right? We're talking about that now. I think with evictions is not homelessness. You brought that up, Ajay, right? But right now, if with evictions, you're going to see a lot more people who are going to be living together, potentially in smaller quarters. And that with the COVID, as we know about the way it works pathophysiologically, you can be in trouble there. And with homelessness, people who are homeless have higher rates of illness and die an average of a decade sooner than folks that aren't. We're not able to figure out late stage diagnosis, even manageable diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, we can't control. And here's the thing that affects us all, where homelessness affects us all, is that ED care and hospitalizations are very expensive. And that ends up causing problems for us all downstream. So, I mean, they almost consider, homelessness is absolutely a dangerous health condition and a risk factor.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think it's I don't think anyone's denying that. And in fact, I know there's a lot more that we wanted to talk about. It's just probably, we've quite frankly ran out of time with this thing. So I've started inviting certain people in. You should be able to unmute yourselves if you want to participate and throw yourselves on camera. I know a lot of you might have questions specifically. Some of you guys might want to go home and have a beer. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive anymore. And so whatever you guys would like to do, I'll throw it open to you. And I've already put a few of you in here. Is there any issues with people unmuting themselves, or are they just not wanting to do it? No?
Just press on your space bar when you want to talk.
We're here. What's up, guys?
All right, Gabe, what's up? How you doing, buddy?
I got Dan over here too.
Nice, nice, 2 for 1.
Turn your camera on. Let's see you.
Yeah, they are. Cool. I told you they're not mutually. Oh, you're not home though. All right.
Great presentation, guys. Yeah.
Any questions for us? Anything you want to throw around the horn?
Can I say something first before we do that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for putting this on and being a great moderator, AJ. Honestly.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I enjoyed it actually. I seriously could do this all day long. I think this is just such a fascinating topic. Hey, Susan, how are you? You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for putting it on. And I just want to touch on going back to your question about discrimination. I think that if it does cause widespread homelessness, it is going to disproportionately impact people of color and people who have disabilities as well. So there will be some, I don't know if you call it de facto discrimination involved in that process, but I don't think we have to, do either or. I think we can, do some stopgap on that side.
Well, it's interesting, and I feel like all I do is talk to people about this nowadays, but it is de facto discrimination inherently racist, and should that weigh into the policy decision, right? That's really, if we had time, I'd love to engage people on that conversation, because I think there's a strong argument that it needs to be a factor, right? It needs to be part of the discussion, especially in this climate. It's just, I want to throw jokes at this because that's kind of my nature, but it's not funny. It's bad right now. So
I agree.
And that's why when you were asking me those questions, it's like I don't know what the right answer is. The landlord, the tenant, because there are severe arguments on both sides. But at the same time, there was an agreement that was signed, and if on the commercial side, there really isn't anything happening, why is it happening on the residential side? So I don't know. There's just so much imbalance at the moment. And we'll see what ultimately happens on Monday as well. Like right now, we're roundtable talking really with something that could change, like how we were planning from yesterday. It changed today. So we'll see what happens on Monday. And if it gets modified whatsoever, we still don't know. But this is a very opinionated type of a conversation, because people will lean very heavily in each direction. So it'll be fascinating to see how this all washes out and how many years it takes to wash out, actually.
Well, I think the lines have been drawn, quite frankly. I do think they have to pass something, right? They have to pass something on Monday. I think, they waited till Friday afternoon to say, to at least, say, hey guys, this is where we're going, because otherwise it's going to come fast and it's going to come furious. So, and the fallout of that is just going to be too great to bear. So I think what Chris described is probably what we've got. So
I would say, if I can chime in too, I think that there's certainly the human factor, and considering what everyone's going through is one thing, but the decisions we're making now are going to affect how people do business in the future. And a big part of this is having trust in the system and what you can count on. So the decisions being made will have major effects. And there's already a lot of people considering leaving California just because they can't trust doing business in this state. So I definitely, but at the same time, obviously everyone's going through a hard time. So there is no right answer and there's no perfect answer.
I was going to add one more thing in. Part of what I mentioned before, with now that if anybody's looking to buy an investment property, they're going to need to know that there's potential harm that could come their way if they have issues with their tenant. In the same way, both Star and I have to deal with COVID forms for people to enter property right now. I would probably find that the California Association of Realtors is going to scramble to put another amendment or addendum together so that people will at least acknowledge that they understand the risk. So to Gabe's point, again, that you're just putting it in somebody's face that, hey, if you want to take a risk, guess what? Here's your potential recourse. You got none, but take the risk anyway.
It'll be 2 pages on top of the 25 already they're signing, so they won't even see it.
Well, they better know about it or it's my fault.
So Manish, Ranjit, who's also a physician, asked you a couple of questions here. I don't know if you've seen those in the chat. Do you want to address those?
Manish is going to town in the chat.
Yeah, I'm like I got a buddy here. The real problem is we don't have there's a number of treatments that are out there, but they're not really great data on them right now. And sadly, the things that we're finding, like hydroxychloroquine and remdesivir, they're not as promising as we hoped they were. With his question about the outpatient, do you see any inexpensive off-the-shelf options, or do you see any more expensive exotic options? Inexpensive off-the-shelf options, not really. Right now, dexamethasone, which is the steroid, super cheap. That might be something, but really that only showed benefit in folks that were admitted, not for folks that went home. But hopefully that'd be something we find. They're thinking about stem cells as a possible treatment. So I've been seeing some trials related to stem cell therapy. Interestingly, it actually works on all of the different pathways that are known to cause problems with coronavirus. Now here's something that's kind of scary. The pathways for coronavirus are the same pathways for the flu. And so I think that if people are still good about mask wearing and physical distancing, we're going to see a great flu season. It's not going to be as bad. And the early returns from the Southern Hemisphere have shown us that we're doing okay. That they're really actually quite down. And I think it's because of COVID. So hopefully this won't be a big second wave, but just right now, Spain and France the numbers are ticking back up. So, these are all things that are making it difficult. I mean, the cheapest, inexpensive way is masks and physical distancing, right?
Manish, since we're talking the science side of things, I was curious. You mentioned at the very beginning of our webinar that the virus is mutated and is now less deadly than it once was on the front end of the pandemic. And I'm trying to remember my AP biology, but as far as like the virus goes, I mean, obviously, like with a parasite, the parasite wants the host to survive. With a virus, does the virus, care, quote unquote, if the host dies or not? Like, is that like evolution in real time or as far as the virus goes?
Right. It doesn't. I mean, again, it's the same thing, right? They don't have. It's hard because it's not like it. It just does what it does. There's not, as far as we know, that there's not an intention there.
Right.
But it has evolved elegantly. That's what I maybe hopefully was trying to explain at the beginning, is that the original SARS virus, when you showed symptoms, that's when you were contagious. And so it was much, much more easy to to isolate and to do the, contact tracing on folks then. But right now, the first 3 days, you're contagious, but you're not even showing symptoms. And that's how the virus has evolved. And one of the things that was crazy to me when I started working in New York City was when I worked in Detroit and Philadelphia, I didn't have the fancy tests that were there. They have these viral pathogen tests, very expensive. And that's probably the reason why I didn't use it, because I was working at two kind of like more under-resourced hospitals. And now I saw that coronavirus is a pretty common virus. That's just like all over the place. And people throughout the year, I was like, wow, these coronaviruses are kind of ubiquitous. And I was like, I hope one of those doesn't end up being the pandemic virus, because it seems like it's pretty hardy and pretty elegant. And sure enough, that was me at the beginning of the year before March hit. And sure enough, that ended up being the one. And I was like, when I learned that, yes, it's a coronavirus, I was like, oh man, we're in for it.
You were right.
You're fortunate in that you've been able to work in the hospitals and you've been safe, right? You've never gotten it. So if you were to get it, right, you test positive, would you be comfortable just running around without a mask? High five and playing basketball, whatever?
Right. That's a real problem. So no, but mind you, me not getting it is me, right? Like I'm like wearing a headband bandana. I've got an N95 on with a mask on top of that the bandana covers my ears with like protective goggles with a welder shield on, and I'm doing that for 14 hours straight, sometimes. So that's me, and that might be my life now. I mean, a lot of other folks have kind of slacked off a little as the numbers have come down in New York City under 1%. But, would I do what you're saying? No, I wouldn't, because that's irresponsible. And we don't know enough about this virus still. We know enough that if you've got it and, you probably could be out and about and do things, but we still don't, I think that there's a psychological problem that does to other folks, is that when you either had it and now you're kind of in the, you're in the safe zone. It's been 14 days. You're no longer shedding active virus that could infect somebody else. I think at that point, but if you start wandering around without wearing masks and, I think that it sends a wrong message kind of like out to the community. But I think that's tough. I think people need to have a shared community responsibility with this. And that's not really in some folks, that's not really the American way.
Hey, Jake, I'm gonna go celebrate my birthday now. So.
All right, sounds good, Stephen.
Happy birthday, Stephen.
Appreciate it. You guys, does anybody out there have any other questions, any other things that we want to explore? I mean, I definitely had more notes on this than I could get to. I see a couple of chat items here. Which of these apply to commercial tenants? The short answer is just the San Diego residential one, just the San Diego executive order for the city of San Diego that they passed. So, you can feel free to reach out to Star or Chris, depending on, if you're on the tenant side. Star can definitely coach you through anything that you need to know on that, and Chris or myself can help you on that as well. And then your other question, Edward Adato, Edward, as far as taxes for Sacramento, Chris, I don't know if you've had a chance to review it at that level.
I have not. Edward, if you want to email me separately, I could look into it, but I'm not aware of anything right now. There may be some. I'm just not familiar with it.
It's just, yeah, and you had to jump on this literally an hour before the seminar. Susan's got a question here. What about quote unquote tenants? This is the holdover tenancy question that exist after foreclosure with no lease. I'll let you do this, Chris, because this is you do this on a regular basis.
So tenants,
holdover tenancy post foreclosure, no lease.
Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't fall within any of these restrictions. I mean, these are all focused on non-payment of rent issues. So it would be like any other procedure evicting a post foreclosure tenant, whether it's the prior owner, which is what it sounds like. If there's no lease. If there's no lease, then you provide proper notice and go through the mechanisms. The only thing you have to deal with is just the backlog of cases in UD court. Which is not insignificant. So that's the only how it affects that procedure.
Cool. And you guys, I don't think anybody had any issues in muting themselves, so I'll assume that they're just choosing to use the chat over that. But with that, I think I am going to wrap this because I think we've hit the major bases. Thank you to all the panelists and all the attendees / participants that were on this. I appreciate this. I know this was very short notice, and I tried to get as many people in here as I could, but it's definitely an interesting time that we're living through, and I think this is at the forefront of it. So I appreciate everyone being here. Yay!